Oh,
We're
we're
live.
live.
Hello,
Yay,
Rob.
hi.
How are you doing on this final Sunday of September?
I'm swell. I'm really ready for it to be sweater weather. Um, very, very ready for that to happen. Um,
It was like 90 degrees yesterday in
I know
Portland.
it was warm. I'm actually sort of cold, like in my parents' house right now because I'm under a thing. So I may get to put on a sweater later. Who knows? It could be very exciting for everyone here.
Yeah, I still embrace this. I was out yesterday in a sweater just because being from the South, it's like, well, it's
Oh
only
yeah,
80.
you're delicate.
It's only 80 degrees. My ancestral memory is for much hotter weather. So this week's been interesting with the ongoing debate over essentially Biden's agenda, the Build Back Better,
Mhm.
also the reconciliation bill, and then whatever Sinema and Manchin negotiated with the like let's build a couple roads plans. I'm being unfair. I'm sure that I'm
Some
sure
roads
there's
here and there,
I'm
then
sure
we're
there's at
good.
least 3 roads. But let's. What are your thoughts on this? Because I know Sinema and Manchin, I mean, especially Sinema and some other moderates are suddenly like, well, we kind of said we were going to, do a 2 track, but maybe let's not do a 2 track, and maybe let's do a strategic pause, which would only benefit Mitch McConnell. But
Yeah, like here's my thing. I would like it if they could possibly be specific about what it is that they'd like to remove from the bill because well, Manchin is to some degree, except all of the so far all of the things that they want to take out of the bill are things that save money. Like, or at least, one of the main things that they both want to take out of the bill is a thing that saves money. It's a thing that it's a negotiating drug prices with pharmaceutical companies, and that's part of how everything gets paid for. So if their big problem is how much everything costs, they should be less mad about the ways that we're paying for it, one would think. But Joe Manchin's got his daughter, so
yeah, because the price is always rooted, like if you just, because it's a Republican tactic, 3.5 trillion, that's scary. Whereas like if I just went to you and said, "Oh, give me $20,000," you'd be like, "What?"
yeah.
And it's like, "Oh, well, you'll get a new bathroom in your house and a furnace, so you won't freeze to death." It's like, "Oh, well, I guess I can find the money for this." Like you need to actually. There's a human element to all of this, and
Hmm.
I've just been appalled. Like the idea that Manchin specifically being presented as somehow this sensible moderate saving Democrats from themselves, when it's like, well, no, his his end goal, working people's lives will be demonstrably worse. So he's
Hmm.
talking about child
People
care.
in his own state, like
Yeah.
the thing is, like West Virginia would benefit from all of these things almost more than any other state in the union. Um, and honestly think that he just wants to make it more difficult for Democrats to get elected in West Virginia because then no one can challenge him. Like,
Yeah,
I think that that's his thing. Like, he really likes power.
yeah, it's just to focus, to me, the focus should be on the human element. It's worth the 3.5 trillion investment. You've had a tweet that you'd favorite from even Biden. Like, this is
Yeah,
not
well, no, he's
not AOC. This is not Sanders saying I need to have like socialist utopia. It's literally what Joe Biden ran on, and this is
yeah.
irony of where AOC and squad members and one of my former representatives from Seattle, they're being attacked as like trying to derail his agenda when they're actually the ones most
Well,
supportive
they're
of
the ones who are supporting it, but they're in trouble for supporting it because people don't like them. Like that's really about it. Like they're supporting his agenda, but people would rather they didn't, I guess, or would rather they came forward and were like, "Hey, we're actually okay with nothing if that's what ends up happening." Like beforehand, like before the negotiations start being like, "Look, if we walk out of here with absolutely nothing, it was the journey that really mattered all along."
it.
Like,
Well, and in fairness, it seems to be like the criticism of AOC and the others has been that they are somehow being spoiled brats and willing to blow up the whole deal, even though it's Cinema and Manchin who said, if you don't support my deal, I'll blow up that deal as well
Mhm.
and reconciliation. So they're the one with the loaded trigger, and they're just like, okay, well, if you do that, I'll do this. It's like mutually assured destruction, which is in the nuclear
They get
race.
to be
We
the
sort
like,
of
call
believe
yourself the adults in the room. And if you call yourself the adults in the room, then legally you get to do whatever you want and say as many stupid things as you want. As long as you do that, you're good.
yeah, and I guess this idea that but yeah, it's like this was a deal that had been made before, but I guess we could discuss the whole concept of negotiation. I think there's a bias, I think most Democrats tend to have, there's a bias towards the deal. And especially if
Mhm.
you just get two Republicans on that deal, no matter how, like almost to the point of I think Republicans figured out during the Trump administration, it's like, well, we'd rather have Amy Coney Barrett with 50 plus one
Mhm.
than like, a moderate with 60, like if bipartisan support, like
Yeah.
what does that benefit us? What's the gain? I think
Well, they
Democrats
like to do things that they like. Generally speaking, like that's what they tend to go for. They're like, hey, this benefits us, so let's do it. They're not really thinking ever, oh no, the Democrats will turn around and do this to us if we do it to them, because the Democrats literally will be like, no, we can't go back and do that because then we're just as bad as the Republicans if we do the
yes.
things that,
Even though the moral, the idea is like, by no means ends justify the means, even though arguably tactics are themselves amoral. Tactics have no
Mhm.
morality. It is the end result of what you're trying to fight for.
Yeah.
So, but the larger sense of the bias towards the deal, the challenge I see is like, okay, well, AOC and progressives specifically should understand that 70% is better than 100%, which
Mhm.
sure, as a meme that makes sense, but it's like always like, you know, if I offered you like, hey, let's go out for dinner and
Yeah.
here's like 70, okay, well, you get
Yeah.
water and some rice and soy sauce. That's 70% of what you got. It's like, well, I don't get an entree. That was a very important 30%. Or
Mhm.
like the idea of let's negotiate to where it's a negotiation. I gave her something and you get not. So we both want to go out. And I was like, okay, let's go get lobster. It's like, I'm allergic to shellfish. It's like, okay, we only have to eat half the lobster. Well, that's a terrible deal. And we just keep getting in those senses of where, okay, well, here's your one shot. And
Yeah.
this is your one shot to help work. And to me, it's like, okay, maybe I'm being a spoiled brat, or maybe I should also say, hey, why is it so important to you that these working people not have universal childcare, that our climate, like literally New York's flooding? So
I
if you're
mean, the basic
seeing it
reason
like
is
my
that
state is
people can
flooding,
afford childcare. Like they can afford childcare. And so for them, that's a luxury.
mhm,
For them, like not having to pay for childcare, that is a luxury. For them, not having to pay an exorbitant amount for college, that is a luxury. For other people, it's kind of a necessity. For other people, if you want to be able to work, someone has to take care of your kids. And if you can't afford, if you're making the same amount it costs to pay someone to take care of your kids, that's not really a great deal. And that's not really possible for you. And so I understand why people like do think these things are luxuries, because for them they literally would be luxuries, but they're not everyone. So,
yeah, it is very frustrating that to not recognize that there's a human. Someone in the comments was
yeah,
that you were smoking on a vape, but
I am. I am. I switched. I'm not smoking regular cigarettes anymore, so I'm halfway okay now. People can yell at me half less, I guess. Cigarettes are still really delicious, but I don't know. Sorry, I lost my train of thought.
Yeah, I'm sorry. I wanted to give you that compliment, but I didn't mean to throw you into the.
Oh, okay. It was nice. I thought someone was being like, "Why is Robyn vaping on this very professional live stream?" And also drinking a pumpkin spice latte because I'm that basic. Um, what were we talking about?
The
I have
pumpkin.
ADD. I have ADD. This is a legitimate excuse.
No, it's well. I think it was generally the deal right now where we stand, and like what do you think will happen? Like, I guess.
I mean, I think eventually, it's entirely likely that everything will have to be done Joe Manchin's special way because, no one's gonna put any he's not gonna have consequences for being a giant asshole. People, they're just gonna let him do it, pretty much. So yeah, no, it's probably not gonna be very good. And then people are gonna be like, oh, so this is what we get. And then maybe, independents are less intrigued or inspired to vote for Democrats in the next election. Because I think that part of one really good way to get elected is by doing good stuff for people and having them like those things, which, conservatives think is like an evil trick. Like one of their big things is that, they're gonna, replace us with all of these Haitians. Now it's Haitians. And they're going to give them nice stuff from the government. And then those people are going to vote for Democrats forever. And I kind of wish that Democrats would actually listen to that message because, yes, we should get people, sorry, distracted.
No, yeah,
We should get people
good
to like the
impression.
nice things that we want to give them, and then they will continue to vote for us. That seems very good and
Yeah.
logical.
I mean, from a political standpoint, there's an argument that like, oh, just do the deal, whatever Manchin wants, you'll be happy. Don't be spoiled, But to me, it's like they are actively. I mean, the progressives are the ones saying like AOC, what she's doing makes sense. Like Joe Manchin is like, okay, well, why don't you want the people in your state? This 3.5 trillion is like no one cares about that. Like it's not. There's no, and correct me if I'm wrong or whatever, but no one's going to lose a job. And as Biden said, all this is paid for. Maybe some of his donors might have to pay a little bit more money. But no, I mean, it's not, there's no actual sense that anyone would suffer because it's 3.5 trillion instead of 1.5 trillion or whatever. And what Ocasio-Cortez is trying to do is like, well, no, my New York City was underwater. Like we need to address climate change, or others are saying, oh, we need to figure out how to help people who are struggling and have problems with their childcare, and like he's trying to do needs-based child tax credits as like there's deadbeat, it doesn't, which has never been proven to mean anything effective. It's just a right-wing talking point.
No, means testing is extremely, it makes people feel good. It makes people feel like, oh, no one undeserving is getting this, but it actually costs a lot of money in terms of administrative costs. It's not like, oh, you're actually saving money. And in some cases you are a little bit, but means testing makes things so complicated that half the time the people who need the things don't actually end up getting them because it's they have to jump through 87,000 hoops to get them. And then you actually have to pay people to make sure that undeserving people aren't getting the things, and that costs money also. That's
well, Santa had a very
people
naughty and nice list. It wasn't like Santa had to hire people to keep track.
Yeah.
It was all magic, so it wasn't like here it's just this is very needlessly wasteful just to penalize people, despite the overt shame that a lot of people
Yeah.
have of accepting
And
charity.
that's the thing. Like we act like people don't have that shame, and they do. It's like everyone in America is so worried that people aren't going to feel sufficient shame. Like, it's sort of a similar thing. People are, you see a lot of people actually saying, well, if we can't say mean things about fat people, how are they going to know that it's unhealthy to be overweight?
Yes,
How are they going to know that people think that they're fat? Or,
we
like, how
presume
are they
that they
going to
have
know?
inherent worth as a person.
Yeah, and that's like,
It's still
it's a
beautiful despite
horrifying thing. I've actually seen people try to justify, you know, all like, the whole like overweight, like, oh, they've actually tried to justify fat jokes by saying, I'm helping people stay healthy. And that's basically the same thing to me as like, oh, people are just dying to take all of this help because they don't have any shame about taking help and they just want to stay at home and do nothing and be lazy. And like, really, no one in this country wants to do that.
no.
The people I have heard, for the most part, bragging about the shit they can pull over on the government are rich people who are avoiding taxes.
Oh yeah, they will brag. I've never been to a poor person who's been like, "Oh, look, I got away from," and I, grew up in a working class environment. I was like, "Oh, here's what I got away with." Everyone feels like, as opposed to a rich person's like, "Oh, I
Yeah.
declared this or put this here for this kid." And rich people just love to talk about tax avoidance.
Oh,
Rich
yeah.
people have a whole state
Oh,
that
no, they'll
exists.
talk like, they'll absolutely talk very frankly about it. They hire people so that like they don't pay more taxes or all the taxes they're supposed to pay.
Yes, they are
Like that is a job
funders.
the person
They're active
has.
defunders of the police, right? Because it's like I
Yeah,
don't pay any taxes for anyone who lives in this.
exactly.
I don't want to actually contribute, and I support the troops. I don't like Colin Kaepernick, but I will not actually. This actually is funded. They always feel like they've paid as much as necessary, even though they pay very little. Actually goes to another when you were talking about taxes. There's an interesting dichotomy that I see where conservatives and often many Democrats or moderates will say, well, real America is the middle of the country, right? Like that's
Mhm.
real America.
Oh, yeah.
So when you say that, okay, well, we're raising taxes, Biden's plan will raise taxes on no one making less than $400,000 a year, which is just not those people in the middle states. That's certainly no one, and
Yeah.
that's the King of West Virginia doesn't make that. And then, but the immediate reaction often from Republicans, and even again, Democrats, like, oh, well, what about, man, that you have to live in a bungalow under a bridge in San Francisco for only $400,000, and in New York you
Yeah,
can't
but
provide.
like maybe
But
the
we're
problem is
coastal
with
elites.
landlords. Like,
We're coastal. You're supposed to be coastal elites who are not representative of the country. So obviously, yes, I am sorry. And I think I don't know if you saw this last week. It's like having lived in New York, I did the deep dive, and it's like even at 400,000, you're not in any way starving, though you are still very close to a lot of poverty in New York. I feel like it's so like it's a city where literally you're 20 blocks away from a lot of poverty. It's still like you're doing okay.
mhm.
Have a pretty decent. It's almost a Monica and Rachel apartment from Friends. You're doing okay with that type of money. The challenge with New York and other those cities, and again, is not, oh my God, raising taxes on those poor folks making $400,000. It's the fact that people are expected to function in those cities with like $30,000 or $40,000. It's impossible, which is
Yeah,
impossible. And
but like
it's not like
you need to be able to have people living like,
yes, to
if people
contribute to
want to pay people $30,000 or $40,000 to work in those areas, then there have to be ways for people who are making that much to live.
Mhm.
It seems like, people sort of forget that. And, just because things are like, yes, things are super expensive in certain areas, but they shouldn't be, and that's bad. And so maybe if everyone's not making, 80 bajillion dollars, the prices of things will go down, which
Yeah.
would probably help a lot of people who might also want to live there.
Well, have we ever? We never really
'Cause
cracked the problem with the cities, right? Because speaking as the extent that I am an artist, but generally artists and other, you're able
yeah,
to live in these historically being able to live in places because no one really rich people do not like cities. Like even
yeah,
it was considered um in King Henry's time and in London, that's
mhm,
dirty. That's where you go and you catch the plague. God forbid, stay away from there. And in the modern, it's either violence or crime.
mhm,
And so rich people stayed away. Rich people then would work in the cities, but
yeah,
maybe go over to Westeros, whatever. And there's a point, I think, in our generation where it became hip to be in cities. So you
mhm,
got like the 35-year-old hedge fund manager who would be around the time saying, hey, well, I'm married and we've got money. We're going to go to Westchester and I'll commute. And like the documentary, The 7 Year Itch, where they always live in and whenever they come in, like it's not, that no one ever lives in the city,
yeah,
but except working people, middle class people live there and working class people live there. And that change became hip. And I had friends who worked for banks or whatever and were lawyers and they were living like in East Village and they were living in parts of town because it
yeah,
was hip, but it was like, wait a minute, that's where like literally if you were to look at like the past history of people who residents of these apartments, you were
yeah,
actually going from like hedge fund manager literally 5 years earlier to like plumber or working Joe, and then down to like a school teachers or whatever, and those buildings suddenly, well, no, well, where does
mhm,
the bartenders live? Like, where are they? To the point, it's like, oh, well, just live out miles and miles away from cities, and then they have to commute to
yeah.
function, and it's brutal.
Well, it makes no sense. And this is the thing, it's not sustainable. I mean, I always mention my all-time favorite article this year, the one from Vanity Fair,
Mhm.
um, about how none of the rich people on in the Hamptons can have servants. Like they're like, I can't find a laundress. That's a thing where someone irons your sheets. I don't even iron I didn't even know I was supposed to iron my sheets. I don't.
Because you don't have a laundress. Those are certain things where unless you have someone to do it,
Yeah, no.
like I'm gonna let that slide. But believe me, if I had a
Yeah.
laundress, I would totally take advantage of that.
Yeah, probably, but like they can't find anyone to do they can't find anyone to pluck their eyebrows, do their nails. They're completely like apparently just walking around like just absolute messes because no one ever taught them how to do these things. Um, which is weird, I guess, but not entirely surprising because no one can afford to live in the Hamptons except for super rich people. Like,
Yes. And so where are the people who would, I mean, again, there are
yeah.
towns like, I think there's certain gated communities. If you're like in certain gated communities in Arizona or other places, you are
Mhm.
the rich people live 30 minutes away from the Walmart and the mall. And then the people who work there live like another 30 or 45 minutes in an opposite direction. So you're like about almost at 90 minutes away from income levels, but it's in a compact area. It's like, well, where are these people going to live? There's no way
Yeah.
we can, and that's where you wind up with people thinking maybe we need to bring slavery back. It's like, oh, hold up. That's not the answer to your solution. Like, why can't I have Oompa Loompas? That'd be awesome. Oompa Loompas could clean. And no, that's not.
Well,
That,
they're always saying, "Oh, well, if we raise the minimum wage, that will just lead to inflation." But the thing that's leading to like making everything impossible to afford is the fact that people on the top have an insane amount of money and they can pay this amount for, places to live and no one else can. And so then that's what all the landlords want to, charge for places to live.
I am.
And you know, it's
Well,
not
yeah.
sustainable, and it's not sustainable for people to not make enough to live on.
Well, it wasn't that one of the unfortunate drawbacks. Not that there was anything positive, obviously, about the pandemic, but people working from home, I thought, okay, well, especially in the cities, we were seeing people move out of the cities. Like, why am
Yeah,
I? You can afford. Okay, well, finally they're doing this. They're leaving unfortunately similar to like when King
There
Henry
are scores
like,
of medications available for them.
yeah, I want to leave all this where I could get sick and whatever.
Yeah.
And then okay, well now maybe it'll the artists or the working people can
Yeah.
afford to live in cities again, and we'll see that change. But unfortunately, what we start to see in other parts, not even just cities and others, where rich people were suddenly like, we're not even just rich people. It's just okay. Well, if I'm going to work from home, I'm going to need a 6 bedroom house at minimum. So each of
Yeah.
us, my wife and I each get my spouse and I each get an office. Our kids each have their room, and they maybe need a room for their school place as remote schooling. So those standards started to that demand
Yeah.
increased, and so you wound up with rich people outbidding like a family with 8 kids for a home, even though there's just 2 people. But it's like, well, even though it's just 2 of us, we need all of this for our home. So the kind of those expectations change
Yeah.
on that rate kind of increasing. Um, so you're always sort of bidding against people who have more money because no
Mhm.
matter what the complaints about with taxes, people have a lot of money.
Yes.
They're able to make, I mean, here in Portland, there are people making cash, entire cash down payments, or not down payments, but buying things right out in cash, no mortgage. And so if you have like $600,000 literally in cash to buy a home, which, God love you, that's fine. But
Yeah.
the problem with that is that the mortgage was a sort of democratizing system. So it's like, okay,
Mhm.
I'll make X amount of money. I can get this amount from the bank, but I only need this. But if suddenly you have to compete to get a home, no one, like what working person is going to ever in their entire life. The millennials were already upset about
Yeah.
it. This is very Betty, like this is a
Sorry,
very
I need to stop.
abstract.
My arm started getting cold, and I was like, I have to put on my
You're wearing a fur stole. It's like the very kind of camp version of this live stream. I need to get like a cigarette hold.
It's a sweater. It's a
It looks
totally normal sweater that I own.
it looks off. Unfortunately, I will not have a costume change in this live
My
stream.
arms got cold.
No, that's a perfectly. I've been out. I have been outmaneuvered, outclassed by this.
I mean, no one is saying that you can't wear.
I have nothing near me. I have like another, like maybe a crown or something to really add to
You
the.
think I don't own crowns
Yeah.
because I own crowns. Like wearing a flower, I passed. It didn't go with the outfit.
So, but yes, I mean, it's the taking us back to where we're discussing with the negotiations, everything with the challenge of Democrats. I know, with no surprise, Tim Scott, who was leading Republican negotiations for police reform with his good buddy Cory Booker, because they both appeared on 60 Minutes. It's like, we're good friends, despite one of us being evil. I mean, everyone gets really excited about that, and it was just like, I'm just take a quick. I just want to point out, maybe I've missed it, but I'm someone who tends to know this stuff. I've never seen, despite AOC, Rashida Tlaib, Ilhan Omar getting literal death threats.
Yeah.
I have not seen. Wouldn't it be really great if an actual Democrat appeared on 60 Minutes with one of those ladies and was like, "We're actually very different," because Abigail Spanberger, Lissa Slotkin, any of these ladies, like we're very different, but this is my buddy. I love her, and please, Republicans, stop, trying to kill her. But instead, what people want to see is fellow members of the same country club. Oh wow, America's in great shape because these two white people from the same zip code and the same economic status, but one's a Republican and one's a moderate Democrat. They get along. Maybe there's hope for all of us, Robyn. Like that's supposed to be moving. Yeah. But look, I mean, I get it. Tim Scott and Cory Booker have a very shared experience as Black men. I get that. But the problem is Tim Scott is not a trustworthy actor.
He's
And that,
not a good person.
yes, that is fundamentally, he's a bad person. And look, I don't want to disappoint you, Robyn, but there are bad Black people in the world. Tim Scott is one of them. And we're not like, okay, well, he's in, he's made clear. I mean, it's like and Richard Pryor talked about this. We talked about like how sometimes certain people within positions of power were often more able foot soldiers of white supremacy than, because he's not even like a common Adam Kinzinger or Liz Cheney of being an open critic of Trump. He's out there going of like, oh, well, Trump tweeted this video of some guy saying white power, but I called him and asked him to take it down, and he did. And that's actually a literal thing that happened. And he will do that. Yeah. So it's apologetic for him. So he was assigned the task of leading Democrats on a, chasing their tails, a banana in the tailpipe version of police reform to achieve nothing. For like there was again a brief window where Republicans thought maybe our supporters might want us to stop cops from killing Black people, maybe. But then it's like, okay, well, let's actually, so they gave some speeches and they kissed some cops' asses and they said, we love cops. And really the problem was like 3 bad cops. And that, like, someone came forward.
Because there's nothing like that saying about bad apples ends right there.
Yeah.
Like, there's no one bad apple is totally fine and will not bother any of the other apples under, it'll just stay by itself. All the other apples will be fine. Just get rid of that one bad apple.
Can we fire the bad cops? No.
What if you just like ate around the rotten part?
Yeah, it's like, so that's what I say. There's only a few bad. Okay, can we fire them? And also, wouldn't it be really nice if cops didn't rally around the bad cops? Because that seems to be like, well, it doesn't seem like you're really like I'm that seems weird. And don't quit, like when literally cops in Buffalo pushed an old man and put him in the hospital, and then they just said, well, we probably shouldn't do this. Then all of their colleagues then resigned in a tiffy. So this was that. So the whole negotiations with all of this, of trying to get this sense of, okay, well, what can we get Republicans to accept? Now, granted, Republicans controlled the Senate at the time, and they were like, okay, well, maybe we can get them to pass something. Whereas, one strategy would be declaring that Republicans are not going to be good actors on this. If we're going to pass meaningful reform, then we need to get rid of all the Republicans, like essentially regain the Senate, regain the White House, and then with Democratic controlled House and Congress actually pass something that is meaningful. And I think this happened. We did get, and I know people like to make excuses and say, oh, well, it's not really because Sinema and Manchin. Oh, no, well, Democrats control everything now. And now, but because they were still doing these negotiations with Tim Scott, and he was just leading them on clearly to the point, laughably so, where they would, what if cops can only beat up Black people on Monday, Wednesdays, and Fridays? And I was like, oh man, but there's a lot of Black people out on weekends. It's like, okay, well, we'll give you every other Saturday or something. And they were like going back and forth. And then like finally, like one thing was like Tim Scott turned down literally making into law Donald Trump's own executive order, which was essentially a bit of fluff anyway. But it was clear. He was like, that's the terminal. Like, I'm just going to make it so that and then, so nothing happened. It pulled the plug. And when I wrote this last week, I mean, folks said, oh, you're just looking for excuses to smear Democrats on this. It's like, no, it's just like, look, I don't know what will take us to learn that Republicans are bad actors, that they were never entered into this. It was always a stalling tactic. And well, there's this whole bias for a deal thing, because how much of yourself, it's same like negotiating with abortion rights, like how much of of people's bodily autonomy am I willing to negotiate with
And the
people
thing
who
is, they're
start
not willing
here?
to negotiate. You don't see them going like, okay, here's what we're willing to give up on gun rights. They're not putting that out there at all. Like they're not
Exactly.
even willing to negotiate on abortion rights, and they haven't even technically overturned Roe yet. Like they're not negotiating on anything because they think that they are right.
Exactly. And people who are
And
right don't negotiate on a fundamental principle.
yeah, and
So
also they
yeah.
don't start out negotiating. I say this a lot, but like Democrats are not good at sales or marketing.
Mhm.
And that is one way in which I am an anomaly because like I worked in sales for a really long time. My dad was in sales and marketing. I grew up listening to sales and marketing crap all day long, or at least at dinner. And they're really bad at it. Like and not in a way that like they're bad people, but they can't sell at all. Like they're
Mhm.
not good at selling.
Yeah.
And I
Well,
don't
they believe the
most of
fundamental.
the people I worked with who were most of the people I knew who were good sellers, unfortunately, were Republicans.
Oh
They
yeah.
were better at selling.
Well, I think they fundamentally
Much
believe in the rightness of their
people.
position, and that if I'm fundamentally right, that should overcome everything
Yeah.
else. But that's not the real world. So I this lady I follow on Twitter, she was a Huffington Post and whatever, she had just said, okay, well, after kind of no response to abortion or thing with voting rights, I mean, how do Democrats think that why do Democrats think that there's going to be any turnout for them, especially failing on
Mhm.
those very huge public issues, voting rights and abortion rights? And of course, this usual suspects kind of dogpiled her, accused her of just by airing, again, it happened to another friend of ours, mutual friend
Mhm.
of ours, just by voicing this, that causes angels to stay home and not vote, which is just not how things work. Like
I mean,
actually expressing the idea that I feel disappointed does not mean that no one's going to vote. And it also is like, don't you recognize that, like in the history, the not delivering something you promised generally does not turn out well. You can continue saying, okay, well, cinema, who, I mean, forget Mansion. Mansion is a dinosaur, Feinstein.
yeah.
And I don't mean his age is turned, but these are but you know, cinema is someone who we elected in 2018
Yeah.
post Trump. And like, why did we send someone in to be best buddies with Ted Cruz? Like, if you look at senators elected after um, Obama won, so Rubio,
Mhm.
Cruz, Tom Cotton, these are junkyard
Well, they
dogs.
had their Tea
They
Party
like,
revolution.
yeah, they are
They
like, no, we're gonna
everything. We
destroy.
had no hats. Well, no, we did have hats, but it's pussy.
Yeah, so like, why is
Um,
cinema not a junkyard dog on attack? Instead, it's like, no, I want to make deals with Republicans and do
well,
cuddly
because
stuff.
she thinks that she thinks that she's doing something special and that she's going to be rewarded for it because people do what they think they're going to get rewarded for.
Mhm.
Is just basic human nature. She thinks this is what she's placing a bet that this is going to work out for her. And it does not seem like it is because her, in Arizona, her approval ratings are very, very low.
Yes, well, she believes somehow there's the logic that you can lack of enthusiasm, which
Well,
that Democrats will realize that she's still better than the crazy Republican against her, which
mhm,
this expectation of like every every voter should make these rational determinations, or they've disrespected the memory of John Lewis or whatever they want to prop up, but it's not how the world works. So unless there's passionate support amongst your base, and Republicans get that. Every election's a base election, which is
mhm,
why if you look, it's why Rick Scott beat Nelson. It's why DeSantis beat Gill. Despite the pollings, they defied the polls because their base came out and they were enthused
yeah,
for them. And this, DeSantis was not someone that independents necessarily were like, this idea of this nice, respectable candidate or whatever.
mhm,
No one really wants that. It's all, and I think what will hurt cinema in 2024 actually is that aside from she's going to like, I don't know how she campaigns with Biden when she's like, oh, Biden's like, oh, well, I'm sorry I didn't get you this X,
Oh,
Y,
she
and
always
Z.
campaign
Please
with the
vote
ghost
for
of
this
John
lady.
McCain. Like, I mean, just like carry around a little cardboard cutout of him. That would be cute. Here's my thing. I'm an atheist, but I'm an extremely superstitious person. Like, I absolutely believe that, I can put the malook on someone by accident. I'm very careful about that. Or, anyone can. But I do not believe that you can curse an election just by like talking about, hey, this might make it hard for, people might not vote for you if you do these things. That's not cursing the election. That's not like people are going to go like, oh wow, maybe I shouldn't vote for that. Dad, I'm sorry.
Special guest appearance.
Yes, Dante's coming by. Actually, give me 1 second. I gotta plug my laptop in really quickly.
Yes.
Everyone can stare at my exciting cabinet, which is sadly not full of potions, as someone suggested.
I've always wanted to get a huge glimpse of this cabinet. It's awesome. And the chair. It's just a really but yes, I this whole idea that you're cursing an election by saying that if you don't deliver, people are not going to vote for you is just basically we're just stating a reality, and history backs up this reality. Like
But
if
that's
you
not
don't,
how people react to things, though. Like, there's no history of people reacting to things that way, ever. Like, no one is. I can't imagine. And I'm the kind of person who like might be like, I have voted third party before, but I wouldn't be like, my reaction to, hey, if you don't do these things, people might not vote for you. It wouldn't be like, wow, I can just not vote for people because I know that I cannot do that. Everyone knows it is possible to stay home and not vote.
well, and it's a reality that I mean, people don't vote, right? Like
Yes, most people do not vote.
yeah. So I'm not stating so what always is like I've often said, well, you're lecturing. I voted in every election. I have voted for Hillary Clinton. I have voted for John Kerry. I have voted for Al Gore. What is the pattern there? I have voted for losing candidates. Now, so so the fact that I'm on board is not necessarily means, oh, we're gonna win. It's like, well, no, I've been there. My dad's been there. We've all been back to Mondale. My parents were voting for Mondale and whatever. So part of enthusiasm, so we talk about Cinema's challenge, is that when you're enthusiastic, it's basically sell. Like if I could sell a broken typewriter, I wouldn't be doing this, right? I'd be a magic salesperson selling monorails. So to me, is I have to be if you're someone in trying to sell cinema with enthusiasm to someone and you're like, oh well, she did that. Oh well, but I mean, man, that Republican's crazy. Unless I mean, I'm not a genius. The best if all I'm doing is that fear, I'm
Yeah.
clearly only going to sell to maybe I'm going to convince
And then
two
if you go,
other
well, this is the
people to
thing.
vote for me.
It is possible to sell it in that way, but it can't be you're selling it while saying, and if you don't vote for her, then you are a terrible human being and we hate you. I don't think that works. I don't think that's like a great idea. Like, I think that you can say, hey, this is the best we're getting. She sucks, but this guy's gonna, murder us all. That would be unfortunate.
And I think what's tougher is trying to
can't-
sell what the difference is, right? And people say, well, there's obviously a difference between, well, on these right now, these are the major issues. I'm
Well, it's
voting
not an
for
experiential difference is the thing.
yeah. So
Like,
abortion someone even said this. It's like, well, Kristen Sinema is an unequivocal supporter of abortion rights. And it's like, okay, and he included this photo of her with women wearing Planned Parenthood shirts. It's like, well, as moving as that photo op is, how is she actively like the House just passed one of their many, show bills. I call them bills because they started in 2018. They passed these awesome, great bills. and Mitch McConnell would wipe his bottom with it and then cackle maniacally. But the idea behind that, and I supported that, was to show here's what we can do once we get the Senate, once we make McConnell minority leader. Then that happened. And now they still are passing these wonderful bills and important bills, the Joint Voting Rights Act and Abortion Protections Act. And, Mitch McConnell is still wiping his bottom with it and laughing maniacally. And it's like, well, now it's harder to make. So before I was like, okay, well, let's take the Senate. I was like, well, now we need to take the Senate differently, more, take it more. How do we take the Senate more? It's like, okay, well, and I've seen someone ask, like, well, Manchin and Sinema are bought. And it's like, okay, well, I donated to Sinema, so I'm gonna feel bad for a moment that okay, well, all right, that happens. I can't all pick winners. I got conned, fine. But okay, well, 2 more. Yeah, like you'll get 2 more. Well, Connor Lamb in Pennsylvania, he's gonna be better than Sinema. He's gonna nuke the filibuster. Yeah. Absolutely, sure. Well, they haven't come out and told us that. So, it's not like we can get to, because Democrats are never going to have 60 votes. Republicans are never going to have 60 votes in the Senate. That's a fantasy. So ultimately, it's the idea of like, well, to nuke the filibuster, you're going to need 51 Democrats willing to do it. And it's not just Sinema and Manchin who are saying no. It's like, well, what do we have? Like, what's the number? I mean, Feinstein's fuzzy on that and the actual year that we're in. And then some of the, some other, Coons is funny about it. Warner's on the fence. So there's a lot. So how many Senate races do we need to win to do anything?
All of them, apparently. And then.
Yes. So, I mean, it's not like I am trying to depress the vote. I'm just saying, especially as it's like, well, if Republicans are passing, these voter suppression bills and then telling me that we need to out-organize it, I don't know how that works, especially when the people on the ground says, well, no, they looked literally at how people who voted against them voted and made that less possible. And so when you're looking at margins of 10,000 votes, 20,000 votes in Georgia and some of these races, that's gone. And so they've already kind of tweedled with that. And like, how do you overcome that? We can't. And like, that's when it came out in Texas and others. Like, how do we fix this? And there's no solution other than like, remember Ruby Ridges and Arc of Justice and that sort of stuff. It's like, okay, well, I don't know. What do you do? Like,
I mean, but this is the thing, like, I get the Arc of Justice thing, but it's not like Martin Luther King was sitting around being like, well, just gonna hands off, just gonna wait for that Arc of Justice to start bending. It'll come any day now.
Yes,
like that. That's
what happened. Yeah, it's like he was active work. He got stabbed. Like there was a lot of getting stabbed.
Like he's hanging on the arc, pulling it down. Like that's you have to hang. You have to put some pressure on the arc in order to get it to bend.
You gotta make a push, and like with abortion, right? I mean, like this happened, and there's no. I mean, yes, I get this response, but it's like, what is the coordinated? What are you going to do? Because it's going to happen in more and more states, and historically, Republicans have attacked, constitutional rights at the state level. It takes the federal government to respond. And right now, on the federal level, Democrats are being, hobbled by the filibuster with some belief that, oh my God, if we got rid of that and passed the voting rights and protected abortion rights, which they could do next week if Sinema and Manchin agreed, that Republicans would then, without the filibuster, and Sinema said this, then pass even worse anti-abortion laws and voter suppression laws. It's like, well, how could it? They're already doing this at the state level. It's like I'm trying to explain federalism.
But also, then they could also just get rid of the filibuster themselves, which they would if that helped them do something. It's not like they're not doing things because, like, out of the goodness of their heart.
Well, I don't.
Like,
Well, isn't that weird, Robbie? Because it's cinema. Reading her op-ed and it's like, well, then it's like, well, you like Betsy DeVos was narrowly confirmed. Like all of these hack judges, right-wing judges who are 12 years old that they put on the federal bench were like barely confirmed. They got rid of they laughed in the face of the whole blue slip thing. So they were putting in judges in Oregon who were right-wing hacks and laughing at Merkley, trying to say, well, what about the blue slip and Senate comedy? And it was like, and literally the last 3 Supreme Court justices would not be at all if the filibuster existed. And I saw an example of sort of being beaten down was Mark Warner, I think, saying, man, if we had not just started it by nuking the filibuster for judicial appointments, this might have ever happened. It's like, really? So you think that McConnell, that's why? Like McConnell's only evil because you kind of provoked him? It's a very scary, beaten down viewpoint. And it ignores the fact of how McConnell's like, which is what is happening now when he was like, okay, well, we're not going to let Obama appoint any judge. We're just going to ignore. And so the point of where like, I can't do anything. So we got to get rid of this filibuster. They've just abused it to the point where, and no Democrat can kind of state any positive good from it other than Republicans are terrible and it makes them somewhat less terrible, but they can still get rid of it and make themselves even more terrible. So I don't
know. I honestly, I do not know either. Hold on. I just, I think one of the big problems in general is that everyone assumes that everyone else operates like they do. Like, you've got all of these, I do think that a lot of Democrats do think that, well, we're honorable, then everyone else must be honorable, like basically honorable as well. It's sort of like, all of the crazy anti-vax people saying this past week, well, if Trump had been president, you guys would have been the anti-vax ones because Russ do that last week or whatever. Like, and they believe that because, and I had people yelling at me in my mentions, like, no, that's just human nature. That's what people do. And I'm like, this is absolutely super not normal. There's no way to normalize any of that. Actually, one thing that I was going to bring up that is fairly well, it's a different topic. Hold on. I have to cue it up here because I took a screenshot and it really just like scared the crap out of me. And I read a lot of these wacky ass QAnon sites all the time. And this one is, I think, maybe one of the more frightening things I've ever seen. And the question in this group was, when Trump is restored to office, who here wants every bad faith journalist, and then in quotation marks, journo -list, which I think is supposed to mean something, I don't know, and propagandists to be dragnetted, individually asset forfeited, sued and jailed. And they have I'm just gonna, can I put I can just send that to you in Slack, but it is one of the most insane things I've ever seen in my life. And I just want to show it to you because they have an entire list of all the people they like want to murder, basically. Like, they're also on there talking about how these are people they would specifically like to murder and see hanged. And they've got people who diminished the HRC server story protecting Clinton, pushed Russiagate, Spygate knowingly, threatened Trump supporters with various reprisals, including using the US government to go after them, pushed the January 6th insurrection narrative, Push for hunting down deplorables, calling them domestic terrorists. Push for banning or inhibiting access to Regeneron or ivermectin. Push the vaccine, pushed for masking. And it's like basically anything anyone sane said over the last several years, they want to murder. And they're anyone who said these things, and they're very, very open about it.
Oh
Like,
yeah. Well,
they're
it's
literally talking like, oh, this is treason,
movement.
and we can have these people murdered as soon as Trump is president again, which they actually think is going to happen because they think they won the audit.
Yeah, well, and it could happen, right? Like at least in 2024, we're not doing, I always, you're not a Star Wars fan, but I always like it feels as if it's like after the first Star Wars, everyone won and it was fine. And if you're a kid, I remember going and seeing the Empire Strikes Back, and you're kind of like, wait a minute, why are they're in an ice planet, and like the Empire has got bigger and badder Star Destroyers. What happened? I thought we won. How did this happen? And it really does seem like, well, I thought we won, but we didn't, right? Like he's still out there. He still has great power with the Republican Party. He's being actively normalized.
Well, he had a rally this weekend. Also, Mike Flynn had a rally this weekend that was super freaking batshit. I saw some clips of that. Like, they all live in an alternate universe.
Yeah.
Like,
and people want to believe that it's not real, right? Like they want to ignore QAnon. And what I've noticed, and this for your experience, is that what will happen is that if you describe QAnon, if you describe what's happening, if you describe some of the most extreme stuff, people would be like, oh my God, that's terrible. That's awful. And then they go and they find out either through Facebook or a random comment that their uncle or cousin or believes this. Then they're like, oh, well, maybe it's not so bad, because that would be terrible if my child's a Nazi or potentially a fascist. So let's pretend it's just a weird kookiness and I'll ignore it. But it's just sort of like me reading a book about cancer. It's like, well, that's terrible. That sounds awful. And then I go and my wife has cancer. It's like, oh, well, maybe it's not so bad. Maybe it's like the flu. Well, no. It's still just, it should be, you should respond to it even, you should be even more afraid because it's so close to you. But we just don't, I just feel like we're not seeing that. We just, people want to, once they realize how mainstreamized this whole has been, which is Q is.
Well, I think a lot of people think of it like, they're like, oh, it's a distraction. Oh, focusing on the kooky people is a distraction from like real issues. And I get that, except for the fact, and I would get it if they were less murdery, and like not actually, possibly going to hurt people, which they have. And that's a problem. It's not just like, oh, they're, a little kooky. It's not just they're like, oh, they're different. They don't think the moon landing happened. It's no, they actively are excited for like murdering people. That's
I mean, Marjorie Taylor Greene is gonna kill. It just, I'm someone, and I struggle with how to cover a lot of this, right? Like with Marjorie Taylor Greene stuff, because I feel like she's going to kill someone, right? Like she's not, and there's still this sense of, I don't know, like, oh, she's just wacky. Why do you bother covering her?
Yeah.
She's an important study. Why didn't you write about this nice thing that Lauren Underwood promoted in the House from that's going to go nowhere in the Senate? It's like, look, I'm glad that people are, the nuts and bolts stuff. That's great. But again, Marjorie Greene's going to kill someone. She's going to lead an army into the House again, and maybe they're going to be Democrats you don't like who get hurt, but she's an overtly dangerous person. Or am I misstating this?
No, I think she's absolutely dangerous. I think that if anything, people are very much like understating how truly like deranged these people are. Like, let me just read some of this from this message board. You misspelled hanged for treason. Colluding with a foreign power to overthrow our government and murder millions must be punished by death. A message must be sent. Another one. How many are involved? Hundreds? Thousands? Those FEMA, spelled incorrectly, camps may come in handy. Lots of rich and powerful folks on that list. People will be in shock when the pyramid is exposed. Next. Add in the board members and administrators of the companies for which these journalists work. Ooh, that's us. Add in the primary stockholders of news companies and the primary stockholders of the sponsors of these broadcasts. Jail is too good for them. Let them walk through the streets and be denied shelter anywhere but the culverts and trash bins. I don't know what a culvert is. It might be something spelled wrong. This is the mass depopulation that is long overdue to take out criminals in all related bloodlines, which I think is an anti-Semitic thing. Usually is.
It usually is.
Should journalists or doctors be charged first, or are there better candidates? I want them publicly beaten. To be honest, I'm partial to tar and feathering, then drag them through the streets to their jail cells. If they survive and heal up, then we can hang them. And I spent a really long time prior to Elliot Rodger saying, hey, I think these people are dangerous. Like these men online talking about how much they would really like to murder a lot of women. And people were like, no, they're just, they're online, they're trolling, they're just getting their anger out. And then, they started murdering people. And we've had a lot of these, extremists actually hurt people. We had them try to invade the Capitol. So it's not like, I mean, it's important to, seriously discuss what the hell to even do about them. Not that I have any great ideas. I've tried. But that is something that should be taken seriously because, hurting people and people getting to the point where they're like actively talking about, how much they would enjoy seeing people murdered because they don't, they were mean to Donald Trump or promoted
the general response is from Republicans have been, again, Tucker Carlson has done this and others have been to, it's like Elise Stefanik with the permanent election insurrection. So this is very careful verbiage. So you take, well, sure, maybe some people storm the Capitol, but, essentially what Biden is doing with his open borders, et cetera, is essentially a form of invasion. So your response is thus justified. And so this rhetoric with this stuff that's going on is
they're claiming that's violence against them.
And Democrats should be, I mean, I do think there's a sense of, I don't necessarily want Democrats to try to get their Jon Stewart on about Marjorie Taylor Greene. I often see that of like trying to make fun of her. It's like, okay, leave that to the profession, leave that to you and me. Even I don't feel like making fun of her as much anymore.
Honestly, she scares the actual crap out of me. I don't think it's like oh, it's cute, she's kooky thing. I really don't. She's scary. I actually do not cover her that much unless I think it's something like actually scary. Because I do feel like it's getting to the point where people are like, she's just the crazy lady we keep in the attic,
Yeah, well, she was yelling at the congresswoman
Kitty Dingle.
Yeah, and just there's a rage and hatred, and so I feel like part of it is the sort of, there's ways to cover that with humor, but ultimately she's a dangerous person, and I feel like there should be active means of trying to expel her. I mean, even if it weren't, but I mean, again, people are trying to impeach Joe Biden, even though there's no, there's no numbers for that, right? But they are saying this is so important. We've got to get rid of him.
You generally need a cause.
Yes. But it's like you can indict a ham sandwich. So if you have, a majority in the House and 67 votes, so the best they can do, they could probably do a full impeach, not just an impeach. But they can't remove him from office, but they're at least saying this is so important, it's worth trying and putting out there. And so to me, that they're always, I think, in a sinister way, very good at amping the stakes. So just acting as if Martin Luther King is crazy or trying to guilt Republicans, which doesn't work, so shameless, into doing something. It should be, no, she needs to be expelled. She's dangerous. She's a hate monger. And even though we don't have a 2/3, we're going to do this every day to try to get rid of her.
Yeah.
And granted, their fear is that, okay, well, she'll then try to get rid of Maxine Waters or whatever, because I do think deep down there's amongst perhaps the party a fear. They feel they have their own
Mhm.
liabilities. They feel like as much as they find Green repulsive, they
Mhm.
do perhaps feel that, say, Ilhan and Omar especially is a liability to them as much as she is. So it's like, oh well, we now have to defend her. We barely like doing that if we went after Marjorie Green. But it's dangerous because I think this is a woman is gonna get some people killed like she doesn't for she's saying it. She's
Mhm.
already doing it with the vaccine lies. So
Well, the thing is, the thing you're saying is that like you don't see Republicans going around being like, "Oh man, we just so you know, we don't like this lady." And that's pretty smart of them because what it ends up doing is it normalizes her.
mhm.
Um, I think that, a lot of the time Democrats really think that like this, they wanted to have as many sister soldier moments as possible, and then people will really respect them. And no one actually that is not actually a thing for anyone. Um, and what happens, I think, is that like if the more they talk about how wacky and spoiled and bratty they think the left is, the more people will just agree with them, like the independence that they're trying to woo. Um, whereas like with the Republicans, they won't talk shit about Marjorie Taylor Greene, and eventually people frogs start a boiling. um,
Well, it's just sort of
and
like there was a sense of if I'm reasonable, I'll get respect for this, right?
yeah.
So okay, well, I will I will criticize Ilana Moore. I will criticize AOC. I will criticize Elizabeth Warren about the Native American issue because others. So I'll look balanced and fair. Whereas I think Republicans are more inclined to be like, if I criticize Marjorie Taylor Greene, why am I alienating my support,
Hmm.
a significant part of my
Exactly.
base, to appeal to people who are never going to vote for me? They'll, it's like everyone is like, it's like
Hmm.
cinema wanting to follow McCain's footsteps, right? So aside from a couple things being wrong with that, one,
Republicans hate John McCain.
yes, his own party was not very crazy about him, and he didn't become president. That
Yeah.
is what happens when there is not a lot of
And it
enthusiasm.
wasn't Sarah Palin's fault. I'm sorry, it was not.
No, well, they got some
Um,
ideas like, well, we
they
need
liked
someone
Sarah
who,
Palin better than they liked him.
yes, we need someone who's who the party engages with, and we get the party enthusiastic, and what is so weird to me about that is McCain, he was a loyal Republican. And what's important about that is that country over party means something if you were a loyal member of that party. So if I'm like, hey, I'm the biggest comic book geek in the world, but I think this is too far, you take me more seriously than if I'm someone who just says, oh, geek only geeks like comic books, don't see that movie. It's like, well, I don't know if that's going to be the best review. Whereas, so cinema has not been like presenting herself as a loyal Democrat. She's just, so it just comes across as she is just in it for herself. So,
Mhm.
and also McCain, his big breaks from the party, because otherwise he's 100% on board Republicans with the tax scam, with the Iraq War, all this, Afghanistan. But where he broke was literally torturing other human beings. Like, yeah, that happened to me. It's a bad scene. We should not torture people. And um, preserving healthcare for millions of like people are alive because of his vote. And so that's how why they remember him fondly. Those two things, no matter what else. So now cinema wants to like follow that example, but then it's like, okay, so you're quite like what part of this is saving healthcare for millions and not torturing people, preserving the filibuster so that there's you're gonna be linked for killing voting rights and for abortion rights, and of course the big thumbs down for minimum wage. Like,
Which is so weird. I'm still not over that. That was just mean. I don't know. That was just
Well, you
mean.
covered that, right? When she had tried to be
Yeah.
like, people are being mean about my body language and it's sexist, and you kind of came in. It's like, I don't think so. I think that's not really how sexism works.
Well, no. I mean, I hate the thing where people are like, every criticism of a woman is not sexism. There are a million things that I can, someone could criticize me for that would not be sexism related. Um, there are a million things you can criticize any woman for. I can criticize a man for having terrible body language. If a man, did a curtsy and like, that I would be like, that is also very insulting.
Yes, well, it is the
Like,
context, right? So McCain's
yeah,
thumbs down stopped an attempt to take healthcare from millions of people, as opposed to her big curtsy thumbs down being
yeah.
related. And people defended her saying, well, Sanders put that minimum wage thing, it was never going to pass. Fine. Like, if there was a ban abortion bill that Collins had tried to had, she would not have moonwalked onto the floor, high-fived Schumer, and voted against it. She would have done it very subtly if that was important to her. And I go back, the Hitchcock had a famous statement of being like, your reactions are always, it could be the same actor's reaction to something.
Mhm.
If I can change that performance based on how I cut that response. So
Oh
I
no, that's not. That was another person. Oh my God, I can't. I was talking about this not too long ago. It was another person that was like, they had like. Are you talking about the thing where like the person has the completely blank face, and then they show like interspersed like different uh film excerpts, and then it's like, oh, what is this person reacting to? Are they,
Oh yeah, I mean, I think
yeah,
that's a similar. I think Hitchcock specifically had said it about Rear
yeah,
Window, where there's a scene where Jimmy Stewart is in his window, is looking out, and he comes back and he's smiling, but it's like it's with a mom of her child, and so that
yeah.
quickly established what a nice guy that Jimmy Stewart is. He said, "I could have totally changed the performance and how you
Mhm.
saw it if instead I had a woman bending over, and what he was looking at was her ass."
Yes.
And he's like a pervert, like, oh, I don't like this guy. So it's the same thing. It's like, well, no, like I just, that's sort of, to me, sums up cinema's entire kind of political calculations here. That I'm a big maverick. Well, it's like it depends on what you're, again saying. Okay, well, everyone else wants to torture people. I'm gonna say no, and everyone else wants to remove healthcare from millions of people. I'm gonna like maybe not. It's very different from like I'm going to literally let Republicans deny minorities the right to vote who are my supporters, and I'm gonna like let them ban abortion while I just tweet memes from Ruth Bader Ginsburg of like abortion's important. And I don't know what I'm supposed to say. I'm like, yes, I imagine she believed that. Abortion rights are important, Kristen. Kristen, what are you gonna do about it? Which is nothing. Maybe
I
find
mean,
Republicans who will do it. If I mean, Robyn,
point,
if you could find
I'm,
if you could find 10 Republicans to support a Stop Republicans from Cheating bill, why would you need a Stop Republicans from Cheating
yeah,
bill? It's like it's like obviously they are not going to be the ones to help you do this. So, um,
but at this point, I'm focused more on what we can do outside of electoral politics. Like, I basically, I'd say we fight as hard as we can for Roe, but we're probably not going to get to keep it. So we better learn how to do some menstrual extraction, and which is a technique, like it's an abortion technique that people do in countries where abortion is illegal, and various other look towards illegal means basically in order to ensure that people have their reproductive rights. I don't really trust, quite frankly, I don't really trust electoral politics to do or accomplish anything ever. So right now, I'm really just more focused on how we can accomplish more of these things without needing the government's help. Unfortunately, voting rights is not really something that's going to be a tough one. That will be a tough one. I don't really know. how you do that.
Yeah,
Good
it's
stuff.
I well, that was a wonderful DNC ad you cut just now, Robyn. Please go vote. I've given up on electoral politics, and I
Well,
mean,
no, I mean, in terms of actually getting things done, like, I don't, you know, and I didn't really, honestly, I've never really been like, man, electoral politics is definitely the way to go if you want to get things done. It's not. Especially as far as like a lot of, you know, poverty related things are. Why can't I speak? I'm like really all the goats right now. I think unfortunately, like activists do a lot more for the poor than the government does. And it's unfortunate that that's the case. It shouldn't be the case, but you have to, work with what you have, I guess. And when you have nothing, you got to figure something else out.
mm, yeah, I mean, I can't argue with any of that. So I think we're coming up on time, but can you
Right.
let us know what is going on with you or going on for the next couple days for your weekend begins? What do you have?
Um, I'm gonna finally finish watching that the 24 Faces of Billy Milligan documentary, which I stopped watching because I was so freaking enraged. Um, just to quickly explain, that dude was uh, found not guilty by reason of insanity because he said he had 24 personalities. And I just got to the part in the documentary where they were talking about Dr. Cornelia Wilbur as like his psychiatrist and an expert witness without any like context or like completely uncritically. And this is the woman who is responsible for the whole Sybil thing, which everyone knows is a hoax now. Like it's been like that, like they manipulated and drugged this woman to convince her that she had multiple personalities. And I'm not saying that, like, it 100% does not exist, but she didn't have it. And every other psychiatrist she saw said, no, this woman didn't have it. And actually said, she like wrote letters saying, I don't think that I have this. Actually, I'm just kind of making it up. And they're just presenting her on there like, this is a woman who's a real expert on these matters. And I'm so mad. And so I'm going to try and finish watching it, but I may go back to watching some BBC mystery. Right now, I've been on Death in Paradise, but who knows? I could change it up. You?
Oh, it's exciting time. So tickets have finally gone on sale for this play I started working on before COVID. We were almost in town.
Yay.
It's called Curiouser and Curiouser. It is two plays occurring simultaneously. So I wound up trying to write a script where your lead is in two places at once was a very interesting exercise. But one of the plays is based on Alice's Adventures in Wonderland. The other is based on Through the Looking Glass, a very modern spin on both. If you would imagine something that I would work on would be.
Yeah, I mean, I'm just picturing Carol Channing because that's like the main.
That is very well. Yes, I keep forgetting that you're not that much younger than I am. I always assume that we have very different. But yes, I have a
Well, I
memory.
mean,
I remember that episode. I remember the Carol Channing Alice in Wonderland very vividly, and the very spooky Jabberwocky monster thing.
well, I mean, that was, I never actually saw that live, but one of my dearest friends in the whole world is Miss Pandora Box of RuPaul's Drag Race. And we used to prank call people a lot back when that was a thing. And she would prank call people and leave messages on their answering machine in the voice of Carol Channing. It was a really good time. We were really cool people.
Yeah, so it's playing at Cafe Nordo in Seattle. I will obviously be in Seattle a lot for it when it opens. It opens a Halloween weekend, and
Yay.
yes. So if please, if you're in the Seattle area, Portland area, come. I will probably try to do
Go
it
see Chris play.
at some point. Yes. So yeah, I'll be running through Christmas as well. So it's fun for the whole family, which is actually a thing. So, but yes, thank you so much for again
Thank
spending
you so much.
afternoon
All
with
right,
me.
I will talk to you in a few. Bye, everyone.
Bye bye, everyone.